Okay. Nishmat Avram ben Avram.
Whose roadside is today?
Okay, the Neshama should have an aliyah. We are at the pasuk of, on the third day, the pasuk says, Yikavu Amayim. 1 second, here. Okay. So that was the second day. Last time we talked about the second day, and we talked about no kitov, and we talked about pamayim kitov on the third day. And the pasuk says, "Vayomer Elohim yikavu hamayim mitachas hashamayim el makom echad v'seira'eh hayabasha vayichen." And Elohim said, "Yikavu hamayim." All the waters should gather. Right? The word mikvah. Right? Yikavu hamayim mitachat hashamayim, from beneath, from below the heavens, from under the heavens. All the water. Remember, we said before there was mayim elyon and mayim tachtonim. Hashem put a rakia in the middle, and now we're talking about what God is doing out of the waters from underneath the heavens. El mekom echad. So those waters underneath the heavens, they should all gather to one place. V'tera'eh hayabasha, and the dry land should be seen, should be revealed. Vayichen, and it was so. Okay. Says the Rav Alshech HaKadosh, Shine Omro mitachat hashamayim hu miyutar. The fact that the pasuk says from beneath or from under the heavens is extra. The pasuk didn't need to tell me that now what we're talking about, where God said the yabasha, the dry land, should emerge from the waters. I don't need to be told specifically that we're talking about the waters underneath the heavens, because we're not talking about the waters of the heavens above the rakia, because there's no yabasha there. So why does it have to tell me that we're talking about the waters underneath the heavens? Kilo haya ola bidat. Nobody, it would never occur to anybody, sheyeyamer, that the verse is referring al hamayim asher me'al rakia, to the waters that are above the firmament. Ach yomar, you have to say, kihine hayu mei tehom mitachat la'aretz. So, underneath the firmament, the domain that ultimately became what we call the aretz, right? The material world. So there's water, there was earth beneath the water that had to be revealed, and underneath that there's water called mei tehom. Kind of like the conceptualization is that instead of like the earth having a crust and a core, that there's a layer of earth, and then there's what's called the waters of tehom, the abyss underneath it. So we have like a water sandwich underneath the firmament, where you have water above the land. You have something called aretz, which has to become yabasha, and then underneath that you have something called mei tehom, the waters of the abyss. Okay? Ach yomar, nevertheless you have to say, ki hine hayu mei tehom mitachas la'aretz, there was waters of the abyss underneath the earth, v'gam mayim al ha'aretz kula, and also water above the land, all of it, totally covering it. Amar, so the verse says, yikavu hamayim, the water should gather, asher mitachat hashamayim, that is underneath the shamayim, meaning not the waters underneath the earth, but the waters above the earth underneath the heavens. That's what we mean when we say under the heavens, meaning in the water earth sandwich, the top waters. Okay? And not the waters that are underneath the earth, meaning the waters of the abyss. Those are the waters that have to gather to one place. Okay. There's a very interesting midrash used to describe this moment of creation, the Bereshis Rabbah, that Levi, the Rav Barachia, b'shem Rav Yudin b'Rab Shimon. So Levi and Rav Barachia, in the name of Rav Yudin, the son of Rab Shimon, Amru, they said, Kol ha'olam kulo mayim b'mayim. Initially, the world was in a state that was entirely water within water. V'ad omer al makom echad, and you're telling me, the verse is telling me it should all gather into one place. Itmaha, right? What a wonder. Mashal, it is a parable or a metaphor. Le'eser na'adot nefuchim munachim b'chaklin. That there are 10 na'adot, are like leather skins or like bottles that can be filled with air. So they're like balloons. So there's 10 balloons nefuchim that are inflated. Munachim, they are lying b'chaklin in a palace. Right?
Sorry, can you repeat that?
Yeah. This is a mashal, le'eser na'ados nefuchim munachim b'chaklin, to 10 inflated leather skins or balloons that are placed in a chaklin. A chaklin is a palace. right? Nitzarech hamelech limkomam. And the king who lives in the palace, he needs the space being occupied by these balloons. Mahu oselahem, what does he do to them? Matirin, he unties them. Umotzi et ruchan, and he deflates them, he lets the air exit from them. Umisalkim b'zavit achad, and he places them all, he gets rid of them, he puts them in one corner. Meaning they occupied a lot of space because they were filled with air. So he deflated them and he was able to pile them all in a small area of a room. Okay? Kach darach HaKadosh Baruch Hu al mei Bereshis. So too God stepped or trampled on the waters of Bereshis. V'silkan b'yam okeanos akan lashona. And he placed them all, he threw them into the waters of the Atlantic. Okay? So that's the mashal. Very strange. We're referring to the waters as inflated balloons that take up space, and God needs the space to reveal the Avashah, so he deflates the water. What is it talking about? It doesn't seem to be that which we are comparing our story to, meaning it's supposed to describe what happened to Bereshis, does not seem similar at all to this story. And also, who put air in the waters of Bereshis that God had to trample them out in order to pack them away? Amnam, however, hine yadanu, we know, ki arba yisodote. There are 4 primordial elements. Eish, fire, va'aver, and air, mayim, water, va'afar, and dirt, or earth. V'halo yikshe lema bara hu yitbarach yisod hamayim kodem lakol. And one could ask, it seems from our description, like our story in Bereshis, that God created the water before anything else. And the question is, why? Lama bara hu yitbarach. Why did God, blessed be He, create yisod hamayim, the element of water, kodem lakol, before everything else? Ukemama Rashi zal, and like Rashi says, shekosav, he writes, she'i efshe lefarish barishona, bara Elohim et hashamayim, sharei hamayim kodmu. In the first verse of creation, it says, Bereshis bara Elohim et hashamayim v'et ha'aretz. And shamayim, we know, as it says later in the second day, it was made out of water. And Rashi brings a midrash that it was made out of eish umayim, fire and water. So how can we be describing what goes on with the water on the second day if it already talks about shamayim on the first day? It seems a little bit out of place. So you can't understand, Rashi points out that you can't understand the creation of Shamayim va'aretz in the first day as literally meaning the Shamayim and Aretz that are fashioned ultimately on the second day out of the waters. Right? Sheharei hamayim kadmu, because the water came before the creation of Shamayim and Aretz. V'chein lama shem ha'aretz, Sam ha'aretz tchila, why did God place the earth initially, toch hamayim, within the water, lotzia achrichen, in order to take her out afterwards? Meaning, if you understand that the first verse and then this in order, right? If Hashem made a fully fashioned Shamayim v'aretz on the first day, then the description of Him fashioning Shamayim v'aretz on the second and third day doesn't make sense. Okay, why would Hashem take the earth that was already made on the first day and then put it back in the water so He could pull it out on the third day? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay, so Zulat hakatuv lamala, right? Why would V'chein lama sam haaretz. V'chein lama sam haaretz tchila. Why did God put the earth first, toch hamayim, within the water, lotzi achrichen, in order to remove her afterwards? V'lo bara, it's not that He created it. V'raka, and that He set it out, placed it out in a firm way, like one piece, al hamayim, on the water, zulat hakatuv lamala, as opposed to the way the pasuk above is referring. Okay, v'gam, and also, al pita kenu, the way we are explaining, ma zeh haya shelo niskar b'yat yisod haruach klal. You know, all these elements that we're talking about, they seem to appear somewhere in Bereshis, but it never mentions Hashem doing anything with the yisod haruach, the element of air. She'im nomar, if we will say, shehu ma shenishar panoi meraki adamayim, if we're trying to identify what moment in the story, in the description of Bereshis, do we see the air, or the creation of the element of air? If you want to identify that at the moment when HaKadosh Baruch Hu made the rakia, because He stretched the waters apart, right, and put the firmament in, if you want to conceive of that as space, as empty space, and therefore that must be the Yisod HaRuach, right? She'im nomar, if we say, Shehu ma shenishar panui, that which was left open, meharakia ad hamayim, from the firmament to the waters, halo Yisod HaRuach, eino he'eder davar, ki im koach yisodi. That's a misunderstanding, because the element of air is not the lack of something, it's actually a power and an element itself. It's a fundamental element. So the lack of something, where you see that Hashem made space in creation, is not a description of the element of avir. The element of avir is included in the other elements, and it's not just empty space. Because the avir itself has a power within it of spirit, the ability to blow, I guess, or linshov, to breathe. Meaning the fact we don't view the element, a description of the element of air is not space. It's not the lacking of something. It's actually a koach that we identify even with the movement of air and the energy of it as a primordial element. Veha inyan, hihine yadanu ki olam chesed yibaneh. Okay, so in order to explain this, the fundamental principle, as described in the pasuk in Tehillim, is that it describes Hashem's creation as olam, a world, chesed yibaneh, is built out of or fashioned out of the trait of kindness, God's divine kindness, chesed. Okay, so that tells us that somehow the creation has to spring forth from the attribute of chesed. V'hamayim mityachsim el midat chesed, and water relates to the attribute or the quality of chesed, meaning mayim is the elemental form of the trait of chesed. Just like fire is essentially the elemental form of the trait of gvura, of might or strength. Ve'hahekesh, and the similarity, biyeter hayisodot, with the other two elements, kasher yavo b'siyata dishmaya, like I'll explain, God willing, soon. Ve'al banot ha'olam b'midat chesed, and regarding the building or the fashioning of the world out of the attribute of kindness, matzanu re'inu, we see, ki b'chol chelik mechilkei abriya, in all aspects of creation, asa hu yitbarach ikar me'amayim. Hashem always started with the water, or the main ingredient of every single thing that Hashem creates is made out of water. So what we're saying is like this. The pasuk says, olam chesed yibaneh, that the world is built out of chesed. And the element of mayim is kind of like it's the trait of chesed in primordial form, and therefore you'll see that everything that Hashem makes in creation, somehow the main ingredient, so to speak, or the main element is water. Okay, and now he's going to demonstrate. So Asahu Yitbarach, God, blessed be He, made Ikar Me'amayim, the main part of whatever He is fashioning in our story, out of water. V'shitef bahem kol achat me'ayisodot. And in each thing, in each instance, the main element was water, and He partnered together with it one of the other elements. K'ma'amaram zal, like our sages say in the Gemara in Chagiga, she'asa shamayim me'ei shamayim. Right? Rashi brings down this Gemara. He says, why is the name shamayim is a combination of the elements, the names of the elements, eish umayim. So even though it's mostly mayim, and in the description of the second day we talk about it in terms of mayim alyonim, really to give it its form, to be specifically what it was meant to be, it had another element attached to it. What was that in that case? That was the eish. V'gam yisod ha'afar shitef b'mayim, and even the element of earth, He partnered together with the water in a particular instance. K'moshe Amru Zal, like our sages bring in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, on the verse in Eov, it says, Batzakta afar lemutzak urgavim yiduvaku. So it says that God, he took the afar, the earth, and the word batzek here means a dough. It doesn't mean like He kneaded the earth, but He made a dough out of the earth, lemutzak, as to become a solid mass, urgavim, and the clumps, or the clods, yiduvaku, stuck together. So that's a pasuk in Eov, and it says in Pirkei de Rabbi Eliezer, "Melamed shenatal HaKadosh Baruch Hu ofer mitachas kisei hakavod." HaKadosh Baruch Hu took earth from beneath his heavenly throne, his throne of glory, v'nosan toch hamayim, and he cast it into water, the element of water, v'nasis aharetz, and the earth was made that way. Omehatzruros, and from the clumps, nase harim, the mountains were made. So that's the midrash. Hine, so you see from here, says the Rav, kishite fa'afar imamayim, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu partnered together the element of earth together with water, in the instance of creating the aretz. Okay, v'al pidarkenu, and according to our approach, nashit lev, al biur ma'amar zeh. Let's think about for a second what this medrash is coming to say. Sheyesh tofes et bal ha'ma'amar levilti ma'amin shenasa olam yesh me'ayin. It's possible to look at this medrash and think, right, without believing that the world was fashioned something out of nothing. Shehivim bidaito shahaya ezer chomer koto. That it's possible to misunderstand this medrash and think that it's not that God created the world, yesh me'ayin, something out of nothing, but rather He fashioned the earth out of some sort of previous primordial essence. Because the medrash basically is describing that all these things that God created, He created them from pre-existing things. So how do we understand this medrash? Ach hu ki be'olam hazeh hi mitziyoto hagashmi dugmat ha'olam elyon ruchani. Rather, let's understand it like this: that the physical world and its physical essence, is a reflection, a similarity to the eternal upper spiritual world. Just like in the lower world there are 4 elements, so too these elements that we're talking about are actually spiritual elements, ruchaniyut, kol echad me'en echad me'arbi yesodot. So each of these physical elements that we're familiar with down here, really they stem from their spiritual counterparts upstairs. Ki alken amar Rabbeinu Zal. That's why our sages say in Bamidbar Rabbah, on another verse in Eov, it says, Hamashal v'pachad imo, the dominion and fear is with him. Osa shalom b'mromav. Hashem makes peace in the heavens, upon high. So on that verse, Chazal say, Ki Michael hu mayim u'Gavriel ish. What is this peace that God makes in the heavens above Oseh Shalom b'Mromav? Well, it's amazing how the angel Michael gets along with the angel Gabriel. They both cooperate together to do the bidding of God as agents of God. Yet one of them is water and the other is fire. And we know that if you put water on fire, right, it's very hard for water and fire to coexist. So it's really amazing how God makes peace and coexistence and cooperation between Michael and Gabriel. That's what Chazal say on this verse. Umazet mia, what's the wonder? Ha'im mipnei shezeh sar hamayim v'zeh al ha'esh ye'adeh chaburam. What, just because one is officially called the officer of fire and the other is called the officer of water, they shouldn't get along? They shouldn't be able to work together? Why is the fact that these 2 angels on high cooperate, why is that a reflection of the verse that says that God is able, only God can make peace on high? Achu ki ikar ichuto shel Michael. Rather, it's because the essence, the quality of the angel Michael, hu mibchinat hamayim. It's not that he's made out of water. It's that his character trait is essentially the same spiritual trait as water. Haruchaniyim, spiritually, who bechinas hachesed, meaning it is the quality of chesed. The ikar yichuto shel Gabriel, and the main quality of Gabriel, the angel Gabriel, whom b'chinat ha'esh v'hadin. He stands for and he's made of the qualities of fiery judgment. Meaning, when we talk about the elements here, we're not talking about matter. We're talking about, it's a name for a descriptive energy that has a counterpart in the physical world and a counterpart in the spiritual world. In the spiritual world, we talk about it more as attributes. Im shelo yivatzer mehiyot b'chol echad gam mikol ha'arba b'chinot kenoda. Right? And that the im shelo yivatzer, but it just, okay. So Michael is water, which is chesed, and Gabriel is fire, which is din, judgment, and still, even though that is each their respective main ingredient, so to speak, they also have, it's not that they not made up of the rest of the elements also. meaning that's their main. Everything is made up of all four, but each one has a primary identifying element. Okay, and the hahekesh and the similarity b'zeh b'chol yeter arba malachei merkava, with all the other four angels of the chariot, she'ikar kol echad mehen, that the main essence of each of them, hu me'echad me'arba yesodot haruchaniyim, is made up of one of the four elemental spiritual spiritual elements. V'navo el ha'inyan. Let's cut to the chase. V'hu ki arba yesodot tachtonim, that the four lower elements, hein emet ki yesh me'ayin nivru, the four elements down here in the world, they came from nothing. They are yesh, they are something, they came from nothing. Kilo haya chomer kadmon chalila. There was no chas v'shalom to think that HaKadosh Baruch Hu used some sort of pre-existing, independent essence to fashion his world. Rather, each lower element just was a manifestation of its spiritual root in the upper worlds, as we know. Kilo tituyar briyato yitbarach et arba yesod gashmiyim. Do not imagine the creation of God's creation of the four material elements in lo b'shil shel shefa mirchaniyuto yitbarach, without understanding that it's an emanation, a steady emanation from God's spirituality, lemata, downwards, mishtalshel, it emanates umitabeh, and it becomes coarse, lemata, as it descends, lehasot mimeno, in order to be made from it, davagashmi, a material thing. So this has been our theme from the beginning, where basically we're trying to understand every single day of creation in the context of, as it's a later development and a more material fashioning of a pre-existing spiritual root that God created in the initial moment of Bereshis. We don't say, you don't look at this process of God creating a spiritual something that ultimately becomes a physical something as a description of yesh miyesh, of something coming into being from a pre-existing thing, but rather, Kilo haya geshem mi geshem. We're not describing physical properties that ultimately become physical elements. V'yein yesh me'ayin gadol mizeh. There is no greater description of a yesh me'ayin, of a something from nothing. Shebekoach ruchaniyuto, when it's something that in the strength, because of the power of its spirituality, bara geshem, materiality is created. Like the pasuk in Tehillim says, "Uverach piv kol tzva'am," and with the breath of his mouth, all his legions were created. Meaning that even there's something spiritual that ultimately manifests into a creation later from the ruach piv. Ubezeh ye'amer, or bezeh yomar shehu yitbarach mibchinat haruchaniyut shetachat kisei hakavod hamityaches el ha'afer. And this is what the midrash says when it says that from the quality, the spiritual quality that lies beneath the throne of glory, which it relates to what we identify as earth, shilshel, it descended in a chain of emanation, v'himshich, and continued el toch hamayim, into the quality of water, ubitochan, and within that spiritual element of water, chiber ha'afar, the element of earth connected and stuck. That's the description in Eov, the verse when it talks about dough, when it says that God fashioned the earth out of dough. V'kara el ha'ishtalshalut yitzika, and the verse refers to this flow of emanation as yitzika, something becoming solidified. Because it was initially spirituality, like we have said, and its emanation that ultimately became coarse and material, harim. The parts of it, the clumps that were even more coarse, ended up becoming mountains. And once again, let's come to the point. God actually partnered and he integrated the quality of fire into the quality of water, v'ha'afar, and the earth, gamhu alamayim, and the earth also was incorporated for the creation of something into the water, v'gam yesod haruach, and even the element of air, tziref al toch hamayim, he also integrated into the water, she'al ha'aretz, which is above the earth, ka'asher yavo, like the explanation is will follow. So at this point, it's not just that we said that what we're used to talking about as the elements, we tend to think of them as physical qualities, but they're really primordial spiritual essences, and they correspond to various traits that we've identified. And on the spiritual level, when God was creating the spiritual roots of things that ultimately become physical, he partnered. The mayim was the main element. Mayim has to be the main element in God's creation because God is expressing a world of chesed, and mayim is chesed. And yet, in each particular object or aspect of creation, God took an appropriate, another element for that particular aspect and stuck it together with the water for it to become the thing that it was meant to be. Okay. We still have an outstanding question of where is the mention of the Ruach. Where is the Ruach? That since the world was created out of the trait of chesed, and water represents chesed, that's why God made from the water the main ingredient of his creation, and he enclosed the water with all the other elements. Nimtza lefiza, it turns out according to this, ki hayu hamayim ki levush al yisod haruach. So he wants to say that there were concentric circles, layers of elements. So within the water, the midrash, he's going to show us how the midrash is referring to that. Here he's saying that within the water there was already the element of ruach within it. Kinod hanafuach, like an inflated balloon, she'a'or, that the skin, hu levush al ruach hanod, it is the clothing and clothment of the air, right, of the balloon. Ubezeh haya ha'olam malei mayim. So that's how we are trying to, meaning we're going to borrow from that conceptualization for our story of creation, that the whole world was filled with water. Ma asa kadosh baruch hu, what did God do? Hitir hanodot v'yatza ruchan. He untied those balloons and their air went out. Kidarach v'hotzi yisod haruach mitoch hamayim. God trampled and removed the element of air that was within the water. V'ayedei kain, and through this, he kaveh hamayim al makom echad, all the water gathered to one place. He deflated the waters of the earth, the waters of the world, and they all kind of blew out into one corner. Shebehiyotan mishulalei ruach, that in their state when they are without air, me'at yachsikotan, they'll occupy a very small space. Ve'az gam ken hotzi al yedei ken, and also through doing so, he removed from them gam yisod ha'afar, the element of the earth, mitoch hamayim, which was in the water. And that's the description of that the water should go to one place, and now dry land should reveal itself. Shegam huaya melubash behen, meaning they were all together. Ubazen yashev kol asher ha'arno, and that's how it can settle, and we can understand everything we mentioned. Any questions for recap?
Lots of questions.
Okay.
Firstly, if you're suggesting that the four elements that we know, fire, water, air, and earth, were embedded into the water initially.
No, I don't think we're saying that. I think we're saying. I think you may be putting two things together. We're saying that at this state, the water as water always has air in it. Now, in terms of over here, the lower waters, it had air in it, and it also had earth. And God separated those things by taking the air out, so the water went to one spot, and then the earth emerged. But there's a previous point we made that the earth is primarily made out of water because of Olam Chesed Yibaneh, and yet for each particular thing, there's some sort of iteration where we take that water and we put it together with something else, and that becomes the thing. So, for example, Shamayim is Mayim but with Eish, and the lower worlds is Mayim but with Afar. Now, it happens to be that the Mayim had air in it. So that's a description of what happened when Hashem said, he popped the air out, but it's not that everything always has everything. It could be that everything has always everything, and it's about the mizuk, the proportions, but we are really identifying that it's primarily always water, and there's something else that gives it an identity together with the water that makes it a discrete entity for what it is.
So what did we conclude about the air, the avir? Where was it? Where was it in creation?
Apparently, it seems I don't have a better answer than this, but the best I can do is from what I understand from what we read is that we take for granted that air was always in the water. So when we talk about water, this is the first time we don't even mention the air overtly, but the midrash is telling us that when we said Yikabu Amayim, that reveals that meaning how do we understand that? By Hashem popping air out of a balloon, meaning the ruach was in the water. So this is really where ruach emerges, and it could be, I don't know, but it could be that we pick this up later when we talk about the Ofio Fif. But so far he said, where is the mention of water? Where's the mention of air? Or where does air appear in our story? He says, don't tell me that it's at the Rakia, because that's just a space, that's not air. But the earliest mention where it's relevant here is in this story, according to the midrash. That's what I've understood.
And also, if everything was, Maim is chesed, and
Yes.
everything was built with chesed, and yet the term that we have in Bereshit for HaKadosh Baruch Hu is Elokim, the midah of din. How do we balance the two up? You would have thought you would have seen the midah of chesed in there.
So first of all, this is a bigger issue because you're saying if the whole creation of the world, the whole story is always said with Elokim, that it's midat hadin that's creating the world, and yet we're saying Olam Chesed Yibaneh. Okay, there's a difference between saying who is creating the world and what the world is made out of. Meaning, let's say that Hashem, identifying as midat hadin, is fashioning a world. It's the impetus of din to have a world, and yet the ingredients that world is made up of is chesed. One could understand that in a deep way, kind of describing what Chazal point out, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu, right, Allah b'machshavto, that he really wanted me. The initial idea comes from din, but the only way to make it work is through chesed. I don't know, but that's easily a kivun to explore. I believe that's the answer.
Thank you.
The mixing of the ruach and the mayim, which you envision as like large ear bubbles, or molecularly there was some.
So really, if you really want to understand, I mean, I think somebody who's learned Tanya, right? When we talk about the elements, the Arizal explains that the elements are descriptions of behaviors. Behaviors, tnuot. So, for example, water, the Arizal says, right, goes from a high place to a low place. So when we say water, we're describing either that kind of behavior, or that it is a life-giving force that gives things to grow, right? Okay, Eish goes from a low place to a high place, right? And it's warm, and it heats. Those are descriptive qualities that are interchangeable when we refer to the midah of Gvura. So these are, in the spiritual sense, we can understand how they're spiritual by talking about them as midot, and yet somehow, if that midah ultimately became matter in existence, right? When we identify these discrete things in our experience of reality in the physical world that present themselves, we identify them as manifestations of these midot. Okay? Does that help? Meaning, if you want to,
in its physical manifestation, of course, it has the spiritual root, which is more
right. So
energetic, but in its physical manifestation, we believe that also happened in the physical, but also, right?
So, as a Jewish Kabbalistic physicist, I would invite you to get out your equipment and observe the qualities of the natural phenomenon, and see if you could be doresh certain phenomena that exist in different elements. Maybe you could be doresh that the fact that the molecular structure is like this corresponds to this about meaning, right chidushim. I don't know if there's anybody who's done that on such a level, right? But it stands to reason. I mean, the thesis makes sense based on what we're saying. Yeah, have a ball.
You mentioned the four elements, but you only mentioned two angels. Who are the other two angels, and what's the link with the four elements?
Mimini Michael, umismoli Gabriel, umilfanai Uriel, umeachorai Raphael. Uriel, Raphael, Michael, Gabriel.
And what are they?
Yamin is small, right? Chesed Gvura,
Yeah.
right? And then I guess you have Tiferet and Malchut.
So Uriel would be?
I wish I could tell you with authority, but you caught me off guard. I don't want to say any of these things without checking my sources.
I have a question.
It's beyond the scope of the Alshech today. Yes.
The second day was not within wine.
Yes.
The only water that was what you call deflated was the earth water,
Right.
not the Shemayim.
Right.
So that can explain why the Shemayim, which I presume is in space-wise, it's a lot greater and bigger than the earth.
Well,
How it could have been split, and yet that water spread out throughout the whole Shemayim.
you're saying its expanded form is in Shemayim. Why is Shemayim the expanded form with the air? Right, it's inflated, right.
No, not why,
Right,
just
yeah.
physically,
You're saying that fact that the Shemayim in the second day, which is the spiritual waters, represents in the physical world our atmosphere?
Yeah.
So you want to say that it represents our physical
It
atmosphere?
seems
Okay.
to me that it must be much bigger in size than
Okay.
the whole earth.
I will just point out that in Pshat, when we looked at the second day, we're not referring to what we identify in this physical world as the atmosphere, but it is true. I mean, it's a good case, what you're saying, that the physical atmosphere somehow represents a physical manifestation of the description of the Mayim Elyonim of day 2, and just like that, according to our story, still has air, then like you're saying, physically, right, that's air for us. That's what you want to say, that our Shemayim is
I don't
air.
know, I'm not gonna say.
Right.
Maybe,
It's
but-
interesting because our
because
atmosphere is
the
basically air and
Shemayim-
water.
The Shemayim is much bigger, greater in size than the whole earth.
You know, it has to be because its occupant is much bigger. Okay. Any other questions? All right.